The ominous red cloud cover that portended the massacre had not abated. It was a persistent, atmospheric expression of bleeding scorn, a reflection of the mad state gripping the world below. Alex hooked the first row of buildings at a cautious distance, the way a cat appraises the destiny of a wounded bird. The air was laced of burnt machinery and rubber, subtle at first, thickening as he braved closer. He heard a rise of voices, firm, authoritative voices, shouting from somewhere deep in the complex, sweetly authenticating his hopes. Living people were here. So were they. But he knew they would be. Alex crept along the brick facade of a building like an 80s action movie commando, the feel of it cool on his skin. He noticed that some of the surrounding buildings seemed not yet touched by the hideous insurgency. Figures were moving in the windows of the one adjacent to him, and the stiff beat of a hammer was echoing off the brick. Alex suspected by the smoke smells and screaming that the worst of the mayhem was presently occurring in the parking lot at the opposite side. Alex felt thankful at first. Then he felt guilty. Then he felt a sudden sting as shards of glass came down from above, following a violent crash that sent him scrambling away from the wall, sparing him the worst of the cutting rain. A man was hanging from the third-story window, flung outward with such violence that his heels caved in the pane of the apartment below. The man's face was a swollen bruise that puffed at the cheeks and eyes. His nose was a meaty intestinal rope, the length of its deep-veined worm-like segments leading upward in the distended mouth of a grotesque figure that leaned into the teeth of the shattered frame above. Its black eyes fixed on Alex, communicating a message of hate and unquantifiable suffering that shook him to the core of his very being. Any strategy he had was promptly abandoned in favor of another blind run. The short trip to H Hall was a shaking fast-forward jump of a raised stone porch, doors flanking broad halls and stairs he barely touched. His head was buzzing and he smelled blood. Alex hammered an urgent fist on the door to apartment 7C. "Don," he cried. "It's Alex. Let me in. Come on, hurry. It's crazy out here, man. For God's sake, Jimmy, open up." There were a series of metallic clicks, and Alex was hustled inside by a stocky man with close-cropped hair. Jimmy the Don, or Don Jimmy, as he was more commonly referred to, reset the locks as Alex immediately took to the couch and started shaking slivers of glass out of his springy red hair, decorating the large man's coffee table with a subtle prismatic dust. "You got the fire on you?" asked Alex. "I'm not selling you weed at a time like this," Jimmy barked. "No, man. The strap, the burner." "You mean the gun?" "Yeah, that." "Won't do a damn bit of good," Don Jimmy said, as he slid his bulk under the leather recliner and groaned as he did so. "I was gassing up when the shit went down. One of those things, I thought it was a crackhead at first, yoked an old lady out of her car and cracked her skull on the pavement. I put 2 in it and it didn't even drop. It tried for me next, so I threw it in gear and rolled over the bitch. You ever see something stand up on broken legs? Because that's what it did." Alex ran a sweaty palm down over his face. The Don stared at him. He made it a habit to looking people directly in the eyes when he spoke, something that Alex usually found uncomfortable given the man's size and take-no-bullshit demeanor. But the days of events had pushed Alex way past the point of minding a slight discomfort. A sudden spark emerged in his own eyes. "Wait, you said you had a truck?" Alex asked. Don nodded. "Yeah," he replied. "I should. Why? And you still have it?" "Like I said 2 seconds ago, I should. Why?" repeated Don with a sharp impatience. "We need to get the fuck out of here," Alex said as he took to his feet. unconsciously dusting off his black khakis the way he did when he was coming off a break over Scagnetti's. No way. I was just about to start boarding the place up. You can stay if you want, but trust me, you don't want to do that. Alex interrupted, a look of irritation rising and falling on the Don's face like a wave. They are ripping this place apart as we speak. We'd be safer on the road. We should leave, man. Don debated this, his head rolling on his lopsided boulder between his meaty shoulders. And finally he spoke. All right, let's do this. But if you're wrong, I'm feeding you to those fucking things. A dense thud reverberated loudly from somewhere below. The pair had not yet reached the exit to the parking lot, and once they did, they saw a woman standing barefoot on the landing beside the mail lockers, blocking it. When she saw Don, her wet eyes widened in recognition. Don, oh God, Don! She stammered as she shot toward him, bundling the fabric of his t-shirt in hands that seemed tiny against Don's bear-like physique. It's Isaac. Something's wrong with Isaac. My baby, Don. Please help my baby. For Don, it was no question. Alex drew in a hissing breath. It was all happening too fast. He had to fight the impulse to beg the other man to forget about her and just get in the truck, even with the knowledge that this would have never worked. Instead, he followed Jim and his neighbor down another short flight of stairs, through the open door of a basement apartment, into a back bedroom. Alex didn't understand what he was seeing at first, but he felt the oppressive heat of it stinging his skin through the thin cotton of his work shirt. Initially, he thought it was a charcoal grill, set alight and dangerously out of place. There was an accompanying sound, a high, helpless, miserable wail that provoked a rise of bone-cutting horror inside Alex as it betrayed what they were actually seeing. It was a bassinet. A bassinet on fire. High tendrils of orange flame dancing luminous and cruel over its shrieking occupant with such completeness that the only trace of the pitiful infant was the agonized plea rising razor-sharp over the crackling of the blaze. The woman belted out a sound more terrible than any of the stalking monstrosities. More pained than the animal cries of tall Steve as his face was unmade. Before either man could act, she had plunged herself into the fire, reciting a devil's sutra of my baby, over and over, even as her thin cotton nightgown disintegrated and her skin became a mass of blisters and rolling blackness. Don motioned as though he meant to recover her, but was held at bay, recoiling from the savage heat. Somehow the cries of both mother and child endured, even as the flame expanded in a firework updraft that captured her body entirely. The last thing Alex saw before abandoning the inferno was the sight of a charring skeleton pawing at the flames, crying after its child all the while. Bedlam awaited outside of H Hall. The Walking Nightmares hellish campaign had spilled fully over into their section of the complex now, and not a single structure was exempt from the siege. There was another cymbal crash of shattering glass over by K Hall, and from the corner of his eye, Alex detected something scuttling into the breached basement apartment like a cockroach down a sewer drain. Another window was destroyed by a table chair that clattered down to the blacktop from the neighboring building on Alex's left side. He saw a dark-skinned woman with rags tied to her hands emerge from the second-story portal to make a measured drop into the grassy patch below. She shot him a single appraising look before darting away. Don's Tacoma seemed like a merciful gunmetal oasis, unharmed and parked close to the building. Alex skipped toward the passenger side door and hugged it with his back, eyes darting for the approach of anything unfriendly. That was when he saw that Don had not yet left the stoop of H Hall. He was standing stone still, in fact. Alex did not see the glaze in the man's eyes as he darted side to side like a speed reader, a sudden captive audience to the erupting anarchy. Alex's own eyes were wide and disbelieving, coupled with his pale skin, messy red curls, and frown cast long in indignation. Alex looked like a clown. One of those pitiful kinds you would see in old movies. A hobo. He completed this circus parody with an exaggerated windmill of his right arm, flagging desperately for Don's attention. "Won't do a damn bit of good," Don called from his porch from the stoop. He looked like a pastor from one of those alternative churches, or the world's most intimidating street performer. He plunged a meaty hand in the front of the pocket of the big and tall jeans. Were it not for Alex's instincts being sharpened to a bleeding edge, the keyring would have hit the ginger clown square in the face. Instead, they stung Alex's palm with a tinkling utterance, who wasted no time slipping the correct key into the latch. Against his better judgment, Alex called over his shoulder. "The fuck you talking about, dude? Let's get a move on." The Tacoma's passenger side door opened with a vacuum pop. Alex glanced back just in time to see Don with his mouth stretched open like a viper. It seemed at first like he was trying to eat his own knuckles. Alex hadn't time to register the dark butt of the gun in the grip before the man's head burst like an overtaxed zit. In a cracking camera flash instant, the door to H Hall resembled an overturned chum bucket on the deck of a boat. Don tottered back on his ass, and for a split second, he looked like a big, dumb, bloody baby before he collapsed entirely. The truck interior was thick with the musty odor of man and stale pot, giving it an undue claustrophobic quality. Alex scrambled into the driver's seat and guided the key into the ignition in spite of his shaking hands. The Tacoma came to life with a roar and a healthy tremor. Alex floored it out of the parking lot. The right rear of the truck bed caught the front of a parked Scion, kicking its headlights cockeyed. Alex heard the tin can crunch and felt the swaying resistance, but he didn't see the impact. What Alex did see in the rearview mirror as he escaped the complex was a thing the color of bloodless flesh, hoisting the body of Don onto its strange shoulders. From Deershire, there was Cypress Street. Cypress led to Chapel, and on Chapel, Alex saw that the entrance to the neighborhood he had traversed earlier was called Ambrose Walk. He must have passed it 100 times on his way to score from Donnie and never noticed it. Jesus Christ, Don. And that woman, and her baby, the hanged man and the slaughter, all of the slaughter. Alex began to weep, which wasn't good. The red sky had kept the world dark with a strange tint, and through the filmy windshield, this was already enough to warrant the use of headlamps. It was out of his control, however. A powerful sorrow gripped him. All of the pain and terror that framed the day's events hung in his mind like the stretch of something rotten, until the worst of it condensed into a place deep inside his bowels. It twisted and ached, as though we were playing host to a swarm of rats. His feelings of loss were a suffering all on its own. All that defined Alex's sense of placement, the home he would never return to, his job, the day-to-day feeling of safety, even his fucking weed dealer, had all slipped away as though the entire rational world was nothing more than an upended toy box. He wiped his face on the sleeve of his white work shirt until it was translucent and slimy, and he could see again. There was nothing else that he could do. It didn't take long to see that the town was a total loss. The walking manifestations of agony had claimed it completely, with no place free from their locust swarm presence. He had to go off-road more than once, clearing curbs and gouging dirty trenches and grass to escape places too densely packed with horrors to traverse safely. In one instance, a smoldering pileup choked the intersection of Poplar and Newton, leaving Alex no choice but to reroute entirely. But not before reenacting Don's gas station story on a bug-faced thing that emerged from the wreckage and tried to halt his retreat. At this point in the grim conquest, it was hard to tell the punishers from the punished, to the point where every focus of his eyes was an articulation of raw agony, and no two were ever alike. Alex couldn't tell if it was the same panic he felt during Tall Steve's transfiguration reaching its crescendo, or a mad fire of desperate hopefulness that set him fleeing down West I-94. There were vague thoughts that everything might be all right if he could just reach the coast, as though it were a pot of gold at the end of some lightless rainbow. His uncle owned a fishing company that operated out of a small Pacific town in Washington state. They had boats. Maybe Alex could escape with his uncle and set out for a more hospitable land, like a New Age pilgrim. Maybe he could live at sea. Maybe he had gone crazy. Alex knew that he wasn't crazy. This made the state of him seem all the more worse. Insanity might have been preferable. For all the polarity of his emotions, for all of the scenes of misery transcending misery that possessed his mind more than they haunted it, there was no shock, no disassociation, no swaths of lost time or sudden regression to render him into blathering loon. Only stark awareness, a cruel cognizance that kept him anchored to the worst of it all. The Tacoma was a lonely freight shooting down the interstate. Obstacles were fewer now. Just outside of town there had been wrecks and abandoned vehicles, as well as stagnant congestion that required careful consideration to bypass when he reached the on-ramp. The open road saw a handful of discarded machines tucked into the breakdown lane. Passing by the Tacoma's windows were lonely ghosts. Only once had been there wreckage on the actual highway that required adjustment to avoid, but Alex saw that miles in advance. It was a flatlander's blessing. For now, it was open road. That could change as he neared city limits, but by his calculation, that wouldn't be for several hours. This rumination on time made Alex realize that he had not seen the sun at all since before walking into Scagnetti's. Whatever light behind the cloud cover that was keeping the world in that washed-out shade of deep pink had not abated even slightly. Nighttime did not exist here, and where there was not a small town announcing its fate in a tragic mockery of Indian smoke signals, creatures still roamed the open spaces like a new species of prairie beast. Another hour had passed before Alex would finally see a change occurring in the mysterious sky. High above where the road folded to a point, the impassive wall of clouds began rolling outward on itself in wispy spirals of blood and spilled cream, forming a cleft in the permeation that reached down to touch the horizon with its thinnest line. Alex took careful stock of the landscape before coasting into the breakdown lane. Threats existed here, as everywhere, but their ranks were distant enough that Alex felt confident that he would be well out of harm's way before they might reach him. Alex put the truck in park and opened the door. He hoisted himself onto the roof of the truck cab without touching the pavement, until he was perched on a vehicle while studying the air once more. A clear night sky had started to peek through the crawling dissipation. Alex saw stars, a welcome sight, a reminder of a structured and orderly universe for a world that had lost the plot in the worst way. He took a tight breath and double-checked for signs of any approaching nastiness. Nothing was moving toward him. In fact, nothing was moving at all. The strange sky things now stood completely still, watching their heralds retreat, which seemed to be accelerating, with uniformed, fixated interest like a malformed terracotta army. Alex had an epiphany. The clarity of its rationale so perfect that genuine hopefulness was now swelling up from the dark places inside of him. It's a storm system after all, Alex thought. Or it works the same way anyway. When the clouds go away, so will they. Maybe not right away, but they will. Same as rain. I don't know how it happened, but I know that's what it is. It's the only thing that makes sense. This was a storm and I survived it. Damn it, I survived it. His attention returned to the cloud's curtain-like withdrawal. A spreading shadow had now fallen over the road, and Alex welcomed the sky with arms cast high like a reverent pagan, like baptismal water on candlelight. The terror and anxiety that had been both his interior and exterior world since early this afternoon was suddenly overtaken by something greater. Hope. Clean, perfect, authentic hope. Reversal of this hope was the final cruelty. The illusion of an unveiling sky shattered as the clouds dissolved completely and betrayed features alien to Alex's expectations. He struggled to make sense of it. At first, he suspected it was a planet, Jupiter drawn impossibly close, hosting an anomalous rift down its tall face that allowed him to see into the space beyond. Then terror became Alex, washing over the young man in a freezing cast. Terror so beyond rebuke that its revelation rendered everything that had come before it, not just the manifold miseries, but everything that ever was unfathomably insignificant. Alex beheld membranous aspects in this new anomaly, swimming and wet on the surface. Beneath that ran veiny rivers trafficking across its odd, flat geography. An inconceivable ocean surrounded by the vacuous black space, in waves of shifting, implacable color that never seemed to break. The eclipsing terror reached the point of totality once Alex consolidated these images in a moment of dreadful comprehension. It was an eye, an impossible cosmic eye, with billions of nebulous lights swimming inside of its gigantic reptilian iris. Not stars, but souls. And that thing was their prison. Alex understood this. This and other revelations came to him by the way of a violent psychic intrusion, heralded by the sight of this awful thing. He understood that he was alive. He understood that he had lived before this life. He understood that during his previous life, he was guilty of something, a karmic infraction that had earned him a place here. At this time, and in this space, though his ideas of time and space were unspooling to a certain oblivion like a match lit at the end of a ball of yarn, he would not be made to understand the nature of the infraction that had earned him this life. That was part of the punishment. Those of whom he had shared this planet were all similarly guilty. Billions of unknowing transgressors, fated to exist alongside one another in a world made to be unmade, each suffering their own unique place in it, while achieving a collective demise. And the suffering would continue. This was the last thing Alex was aware of, before all of the agony, woe, and latent madness he had experienced to that point came surging back, manifested as a nest of sentient maggots that flooded him from the inside out. Alex could not scream as they rose in his throat, but he could feel their hatred and apathy, as impassable as a mountain. What remained of Alex implored to his mind's usurper for a final revelation, some additional truth. Anything beyond what he had been left with, even if it was just a whispered suggestion. None came. Alex's eyes were wet with pleading desperation as they birthed a writhing swarm. Soon, his very consciousness would be pulled 100,000 ways down into their fetid guts, until he too became a part of the darkness.